Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our HCL open mic using OneTest Performance to Performance Test Stubs. My name is Kim Splain. I'll be your moderator today. I'd like to go over a couple quick housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, the session is being recorded, so if you prefer not to participate in the recorded session, please go ahead and drop from the call now. And then during the webinar, we'd like you to type your questions in the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel, and then one of our team members will respond to you as soon as they can. And then if we have time at the end, we'll take a minute to review some of the questions that came in throughout the presentation. So that's it for housekeeping. Thank you again for taking the time to join us today. We hope you enjoy the webinar. Now I'm going to hand things over to Joselle to get us started. Joselle?
Thanks, Kim. As Kim mentioned earlier, today we'll be using HCL OneTest Performance to do performance test on the Stubs. So my name is Giselle and I will be your presenter for today. I'm level 2 support for testing tools. Okay, so let's start. So first off, we will be testing Stubs, right? So what is a Stub? So a Stubs is used to mimic a live web service that an application under development can use. So if, say for example, our web services are not yet ready, we can publish these stubs and we can try to use them and test them. So why do we need to do performance tests on our stubs? So it's useful to know the throughput capacity of the stub, as this will affect our application development and testing. So basically, we want to ensure that our stubs will not be the cause of the bottleneck for the applications. So this is so how do we create stubs? This is where the HCL OneTest API comes in. So we can use HCL OneTest API to create a stub and publish it to our HCL quality server. And we can do performance tests on our stubs by once that the stub is published, we can use HCL OneTest Performance to record the test runs in HCL OneTest API, and then we can play back to check the stub's throughput capacity. I think the best way we can discuss or create this is to do a demo. So I'm going to first open HCL OneTest API to create a stub. So I have my HCL OneTest API here. I'm going to create a project. I'm going to name our project demo for today. And then, as mentioned earlier, we will be using our HCL quality server, which I already have open here. So we will be connecting our HCL OneTest API on the HCL quality server. So I have my URL right here, and I'll be using the domain web demo. I won't be adding any authentication realms or management integrations here, so I'll just create the project. Okay, so now I have created my project. I'm going to go to my architecture school and add my web service. So for this instance, I'll be using a WSDL from my HCL quality server, and I'm using the example also from our HCL quality server. Okay, so for this test, I'm going to be using the echo service WSDL as an example. So I'm going to use that and load it. Hit next. Okay, so going back to our presentation, so I'm going to create a test using echo example shipped with HCL quality server, and I'm going to configure my test output response from the echo service. So since I have already linked my echo WSDL to my HCL OneTest API, I can conveniently create a test and a stub for this. Okay, so now I already have my stub and my test, but I also have to configure my test. So initially, for my request, I am going to go to configure my test to display hello world and save that one. And then for my test, I want to be able to receive any value from my test. So I will remove the assertions here so that whatever value I receive from my test, I'll be able to accept it. And then for my storage, I'm also going to add a tag right here, a quick tag right here, and I'm going to explain you later why. Okay, the reason I wanted to add a tag for my receive is that whatever value I receive from my test will be stored on my echo string return, and I'm going to create a log to display that whatever is received will be shown on my HL1Test API output. So I'm going to add here received, and then I'm going to insert my echo string return. Okay, so now I already have my test configured. Let's go back right here. Okay, so I have already configured my test output to respond to my echo service. I have created a stub. So now I will configure the stub to return stub hello world. So I'm going to go back to my stub and configure it to return hello stub. So the purpose of this is that if I hit the live service, I know that my test will display my request, which is hello world, and to be able to differentiate if it's using the stub will display stub hello world. So I'm going to save this, and then I will go and proceed to publish my stub. The HL quality server, and then I'm going to use version 8 to publish my stub. Okay, I can now go to my HL quality server to see if my stub has been published. Then go to my environments. Okay, so now I can verify that my stub has been published. It's version 8, the same one as I entered before. So I'm going to run my stub now. Running the stub sometimes takes between 30 seconds to 2 minutes. So let's go back to our API. And then I'm going to go to my architecture school and show you the physical view. So currently I'm configured to connect to my HL quality server. So that's the live service. So for this instance, I'm going to call this connection live, verify that I'm not using any host port and that I'm using the SSL. Okay, now I'm going to see if my stub is published. So, okay, so now I have verified that my stub is running. So I'm going to configure to add more connections to my stub. So first off, I wanted to show you my test. So this one is configured to connect to the live service, right? So if I run this test, I expect to be able to connect to the live service, and just as we have set on our logs, we can see here that I received the hello world, the original intended message from our test. So now I'm going to configure my test to connect to this stub. So I'm going to go right here. I'm going to copy the connection and configure this. So I'm still using the host and the port 5443. But for this instance, I will be using a proxy that has been provided for me on my HL quality server. So how do I know the proxy that I'll be using? So I can go to my infrastructure, open the HTTP, and then get my port here. I'm going to copy this one, and then go to my client, use that port. And I'll also be using the same host because here, this is my host, the comp1384-1. Okay, I need to put this in my host. Okay, I'm going to save that one. And then the third way we can be able to use our stub is by connecting to the stub directly. So I'm also going to copy this one, paste and modify this. So I'm going to use direct. And then on my HL quality server, how can I check which port I'll be using? It's this one. So I'm going to be using the routing. The comp1384-1 is also the same one. This is the IP address. But for the port, I'll be using 55262. So instead of using 5443, since I'm using the direct connection, I'm going to use the port 55262. Okay. I'm going to save this one, and then we're going to test it. So since we're currently binded to the live connection, so I'm going to go to my logical view and set my binding to connect to the proxy first. Okay, so I'm going to go back. Now that I have already binded my connection to the proxy, I'm going to go back to my test and run my test. Okay. Okay. Let me double check my stub. Okay. So now I have one way I can confirm if my test has connected or used the stub is to go to my environments again, and you can see here that there's an additional one hit from in our stub. So that means when we run the test, we hit this stub. Okay, so now I'm going to try to check I'm going to use my direct connection to the HL quality server. So I'm going to go back to my logical view. I'm going to set my binding to direct, and then go back to my test and run it again. Okay, so both tests is passed. So another way we can check is to see here that, okay, so there's an additional hit on my stub. Okay, so let's go back. So going back, so we have already created a stub using the echo example in the quality server. We have configured the stub, and then we have published the stub to the HL quality server and started the stub. So we have also created our bindings. We created 3 bindings. One is to hit the live service. One is to hit the stub using or going through the HCL quality server proxy, and then hitting the stub directly bypassing our HL proxy. Okay, so now that we have already configured our tests to run, so we're going to proceed now with using the HL performance test. So now that we have our stubs established, so we're going to use HL OneTest performance. I'm going to go to my HL OneTest performance, and then I'm going to go create a recording. So I'm making an HTTP test. I'm going to use demo and then the date for today. And then since I'm not using any browser and I'm recording from HL OneTest API, I'm going to select Unmanaged Application. So if you see here, for our recording, we will be using the proxy port 1080. So we just have to remember that one. So our local machine is listening to port 1080. So I'm going to go back to my HL OneTest API. And just like when we added our connections to the stub, I'm going to create another to connect to my HL OneTest performance. So I'm going to name this one HL OneTest performance. Okay, so I'm going to still be using the host, and I will use my proxy host. Since I'm still connected to my HL quality server, my client will be my local host, and my proxy port will be 1080. So this is so that when we try to run our test, everything will be recorded on our HL OneTest performance. So I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to set my binding to HL OneTest performance, and then I will then run my test. So one way we can check if it's really bounded to my HL OneTest performance is if we see the packets go up. So I'm going to run. Okay. So I can see that the packets have gone up, so it has been recorded to my HL OneTest performance. I'm going to go back here and stop my recording.
Jessel, can I have you bind to the stub by the proxy again, please? And I noticed that when we ran the stub, it didn't say stub hello world.
Okay.
Let's just double check that.
Okay. You want me to try to run the binding
bind
again?
To the proxy and run the test again, because
sure.
I'm pretty sure it said receive blank, so we probably just missed a step. But let's.
Okay. I'm going to bind it again to my proxy, and then rerun my test. Okay.
Yeah. See the receive blank. Edit the echo stub. We probably didn't do a save or something.
Yeah. Okay. I've already added my stub hello world. Okay. Let me do that. And then, do you want me to republish my stub?
No, just
run the test
that's
again.
We can fix that after the demo, but it may be that we're not receiving the response and we have to look into it, but this shouldn't affect the performance of the stub because the stub is still getting hit. But that's just something I noticed, and I can work with you after to figure out why. But
okay. I think it's because when I changed the value of the text, I didn't hit save there. So it's probably
okay. That makes sense.
The same thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So going back to my HL performance, I already have my test. Okay. So now this test is since we recorded this and we were hitting the live service, so we can verify that on the server connections. So we can see that our host is the quality server machine, and then we are using the 5443 as our port. So this test will then be using the live service. So let's go back here. So I have already generated my test. So I'm going to create versions of the test to hit the live service, hit the stub going through the proxy, and hit the stub directly bypassing the proxy. The same way that we did in HL OneTest API. So I'm going to go back to my HL OneTest performance and then create 3 versions of the test. So I'm going to copy this, and then it's a new instance. This one will be hitting the live service. Another one will be using the proxy. And the last one will be direct. Okay, so I'm going to modify the first one, since we're already hitting the live service from our server connections, so we're not going to change that one. And then let's go to our proxy. Okay, so to be able to hit the proxy, we can add here. Okay, the proxy here. So just like we did in HL OneTest API, we're going to use the proxy from the HL quality server here on the infrastructure. So our host is our comp 1384-1, and then the proxy will be the 3128. And I'm going to save this test. So I've already created that test. We'll also modify the value of direct. And then just like what we did on HL OneTest API, we're going to go back here, go to our network, and then get the port so that we can hit our stub directly. Okay, so I want to show you, or I want to try testing one of my tests. So I'm going to close the others and try to run this test. So on my HL OneTest performance, I'll be running this test. And since I'm hitting the stop using the proxy, I should expect that my HL quality server, the stub hit will also increase. So it's just okay, so my test is successfully run, so let's check. Okay, so the hit count has gone up. So let's go back. So I've already created my tests, and I'm also going to modify my tests to include them in a loop. So going back, what we actually want to achieve is to check the capacity throughput of our stub, right? So we are going to add our tests to a schedule so that we will be able to see how much our stub can, the capacity throughput of our stub when testing or performance testing. So let me just modify my tests so I can add a loop on my test. I'll make this loop infinite and then save this, and then I'll do the same thing in live and direct. The reason why I'm adding the tests inside the loop is that so that every time the test is run, it doesn't have to reset the connection. To add the loop here. This one. Okay, so now I'm going to create a schedule for each of my tests.
I think the last two tests changed the loop to infinite. I think we have the default one.
Yeah, good catch. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to create my schedule. I'm going to create a new schedule. So I'm going to call this schedule. Let's try to create a schedule first for direct. I'm going to create an additional number of users for 500 and then create 3 stages for my test. Okay, so I have a schedule for direct. I'm going to add my one. And then I'm going to modify my test to make the users incrementing. So for this one, I'm going to, instead of 500, I'm going to add to make it 1,000 users. And then for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to shorten the runtime of my schedule for 30 seconds. And all users should be over 3 seconds. Okay, going to do the same thing. 30 seconds. For 3 seconds. And then the last one, I'm going to make 1,500 users, and each user, this one will be running 30 seconds, 3 seconds for each user. And I'm going to run this now. So I want to try running my schedule first to show you.
Yeah, the tricky thing when we do performance testing, we don't know at this point if the stub can handle 500 users or 1,000 or 1,500, but you have to start somewhere. So we just picked 500, 1,000, 1,500. If the stub can handle it, then the next, you could tweak the schedule to do 1,500, 2,000, 3,000. Or the stub can't handle like 500 users, then we have to go back and do like maybe 100, 250, 400 users. So there's nothing magic about the 500 and 1,000 or 1,500 other than we have to have a starting point, and that just seemed like a good number for the starting point.
Yeah, for this example, since we have a fairly simple application, which is Echo, so we hope or we assume that the 500 users would be able, or the stub would be able to handle 500 users. And
we've done this before, so we already know just from prior testing that we can handle 1,500 users. So, but if you're starting out from scratch and you don't know, just pick something as a starting point, and then you may have to tweak it the next time you do a VU schedule. And that would be true for any performance test using OneTest performance, not just testing stubs.
Okay, so I have, now that it's running, I've selected the 500 users and the page throughput, so we can see the rate of hits that we get for 500 users. So currently we have 737 as the average. You can also see on our stub the frequency of how much the performance test is hitting the stub. So I think to go back to our performance test, we can see the 1,000 users running. So for 1,000 users, let me expand this. So we average at around 1,754. And then let's wait for the last 1,500 users. Okay, so since we're hitting the stubs, we can see that the hits are getting increased. So going back, so we were able to create a schedule to hit our live service, HL quality server proxy, and direct. So we have run a sample virtual VU schedule, and we used the stub direct for the schedule. Okay, I think we're almost done with the test.
Yeah. Yes, we see the status performing test log data, so that's a clue that it's done. But notice this one, when there's a big gain from 500 to 1,000 users. I think it went from like, what, 900 to 1,750 or 700, but we didn't get that big of a gain when we went from 1,000 to 1,500. So this, for performance testing purposes, you could say this echo stub can handle 2,000 transactions per hits per second, which is adequate, probably more than adequate. Just there's no real reason at this point to push 2,000 or 2,500 virtual users unless you really need to squeeze that, you know, the exact number of hits per second. But that tells us that this stub can handle 2,000 hits per second, which is a very capable stub, but it's also very simplistic too. But
yeah, so yeah, since we can see that 2,000 is like, there's not a lot of increase from the 1,000 to 1,500. So if you want to modify or check, you can also still modify the value, the number of users, to see if the up to when will the user limit be. Okay, so earlier today, I've also tried to run a schedule on the 3 types of my tests. So I have created my schedule to hit the live, the stub direct, and the proxy. So I'm going to skip over creating the schedule for each of the tests since I've already created them here. And I'm going to show you a comparison of how the different types of connections differ in the page performance. So I'm going to select all of them and then compare the results. I'm going to close the others for now. And then I'm going to go to the page throughput and select the entire run. Okay, so this is how I can compare the difference between my live, my stub hitting the direct, and the stub proxy. So as you can see here, when I'm using the live connection, I'm hitting the echo service 125, and then the direct for 134, and then 96. So based from the 3 comparisons, I can see here that the stub direct is the fastest way to be able to connect to the service. So yeah.
yeah, it's also more throughput than the live service. So if you needed this echo stub for application development, it's not going to be a bottleneck because in fact it's more efficient than the live service, which is what we just saw from the results. The other thing in the results, we saw that going to the proxy, we got 96 hits per second, I think, versus live 125. Now, if you think about it, if you're hitting the stub directly, you're going from OneTest performance, you're hitting the stub, and you're going back. If you're going through the proxy, you're sending it through the quality server proxy, which goes to the stub. The stub responds to the proxy responds to OneTest performance. So there's double the network traffic. So that would explain, in this case, why hitting the stub through the proxy, you get a lower throughput. But it's 96 hits per second. In this case, is comparable to the live rate of 125. It's in the same magnitude, I think is the word. So we know that if you're going to use a stub for application testing, you're going to use the proxy. Chances are you're not going to have a bottleneck because it's only slightly slower than the live service in this case.
Okay. So yeah, I have shown that this is the, if you want to check the individual results for the schedules, I have the check here. The live, you can check the page throughput here. So we just did a comparison so that we'll be able to see all the results for each of the schedules. Okay, so I've also attached a couple of references for the product documentations. I have them right here. One of which is to use the test control panel or the HL quality server in performance test for service testing. So everything that we have shown here for this link, they use the calculator example, whereas we use the echo. So you can double check it here. And then I also added a link on some of the performance testing tips, looping within the tests, and finally the repeating tests in a schedule.
The last link kind of describes why we put the loop in the test instead of the schedule level. It tells you loops in the test reuse server connections. Use this method with loops that have high iteration counts. That's us, because we're doing performance testing. The stress test the server, that's what we're trying to do. So that's why we put the loop in the test. You could put it in the schedule, but you may see slower throughput, and you could run out of connections. It's kind of rare, but that's a possibility. But if you put the loop in the test, you won't run out of connections because we reuse them.
Okay. So now I'll be reviewing the questions.
Just a comment. This we have a baseline, right? We have a test hitting, let's say, the stub directly, and we know it's capable of about 2,000 hits per second. Now, if you want to change something in the stub, like there's an optimization setting, there's a number of engines you can use, you can increase the memory for the agent and the proxy. There's all types of tweaks you can do to a stub. And it's good if you just change one thing, like optimize the stub and restart it. You can see if it actually does give you more throughput than just the default settings. If you have a more complicated stub where you're doing test data lookup, you can see a difference if the test data is in an Excel spreadsheet versus a CSV, separated file. So you can tweak one thing, go back to OneTest performance. You can see now that we have a baseline, how that one tweak will hinder the performance, if any, of a stub. So it's kind of fun. Once you get the baseline, then you can start tweaking, and then you can see what each tweak is going to cost you in throughput. So it's very useful to performance test these stubs.
Okay. Some of the questions that we had earlier was, can we do stub performance testing without result database? Actually, OneTest performance doesn't have a results database, so we only have our results on this page. And then another question is, can we do stub performance testing? I think that's the same question, without the results database.
Yeah, that kind of, I think I typed the answer in, but I'm not sure if it got through the web tool. But the results database is on the quality server side for the stub execution. Right now, we don't have a results database configured, but this would be a perfect example of if we went back and configured a results database for the stub, and we go back and run this schedule live. How much is it going to hit hurt the throughput of the stub? We don't know. So that's one of the fun things is, we can go back and turn on the results database or configure it, go back and run this test. I kind of expect there's going to be more less throughput when you have the results database enabled, but there's only one way to find out, and that points back to do a performance test against it. And then we know exact numbers of if it's going to help or hinder the throughput of the stub. You never really know what a change is going to do unless you actually go back and do a performance test against it to get the actual live numbers.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And then one of the last question was what is the HL quality server used for? So HL Quality Server is a control panel to primarily manage the stubs. So as we've shown earlier, you can see the stubs here. There are controls to start the stub and then to stop the stub. And then you can also see, hold on. There are also other network tabs where you can see the properties of our stub. It's also in the, it's actually also on the network tab. So that's where we, if you remember, that's where we got the port number for hitting the stub directly. So here. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, I think we're good for now. Kim?
Okay. Yeah, I don't see any more coming in. So thank you, Giselle. Thanks, team. Thank you for joining us, everyone. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I will be sending out the recording and the presentation deck in the next couple of days. So keep your eye open for that. And thanks for joining us. Hope to see you next time. Have a good day, everyone.